welcome back to the channel where your likes, comments, and subs are always greatly appreciated. So Zoom just dropped another firmware update for the R20 multitrack, or moving your firmware version up to 2.4 if you install the update. This is the second firmware update that Zoom has released publicly. The R20 shipped with version 1.0 software firmware loaded onto it, and they updated that firmware to version 2.0 in spring of 2022. The big feature that was added for that 2.0 version upgrade was the Mackie control protocol inside of the R20, which allows it to interface with most DAWs, either as a 2 input, 2 output, or as an 8 input, 4 output interface, which would also give you transport controls and fader controls. So that's what really was installed on that 2.0 firmware update. But there was also a major bug that was fixed. I was never able to recreate the bug for myself. I never had it happen to me, but several people had mentioned it in the comments of several of my other videos, and that is if you recorded multiple regions or you stacked multiple regions within a track, occasionally you would back out of the project and then come into the project again, or maybe you'd power off the machine, and when you came back you lost what you had recorded. So if you had multiple regions recorded on a track, sometimes they just disappeared. If you do buy an R20 and it is installed, or it comes preloaded with version 1.0, you definitely want to make sure that you upgrade the firmware on that so you don't have that kind of nasty bug happen to you and you lose your recorded songs and audio regions. Beyond that, there was just some minor bug fixes that they had reported. So now we've moved from the 2.0 version of the firmware to 2.4. And really in this version, there's only a couple minor fixes, and there really isn't there's no new features that I've been able to notice when I've been playing around with it now for a little bit more than a day with the 2.4 software on it. So the 2.4 firmware update was released in July of 2022. Depending on your region, it may be a little bit different. I think it usually shows up in Japan first. In the US, it showed up on, I don't know, maybe like July 17th or 18th. But with that, it's pretty easy to install a firmware update if you haven't done it before and you own an R20. I made a very short video on it. It's less than 3 minutes long. I'll put a link in it to this video so you can click on that if you want the instructions on how to run the firmware update. But once you run the firmware update and you install the new firmware, you're ready to go. The changes are pretty much minor. They're really just bug fixes. So the first bug fix that was incorporated here was that if you're using the R20 hooked up to a computer through the USB port as a DAW controller, and at the same time you opened up Zoom's Guitar Lab software, which allows you to manage and edit the effects in the R20. If you had both of those open, or if you had the DAW open and you were running the DAW as a transport controller, then you opened up the Guitar Lab, it would freeze up the R20. So this firmware update fixes that you can open up Guitar Lab if you want to at the same time that you're using this to control your DAW. Outside of that, there was also a bug that I never ran across, but it's mostly because I don't switch back and forth between the track view and the fader view. But apparently, if you're in track view like I am right now, you hit record and you're starting to record a new track. If you had a compression effect or a limiter effect or a noise gate on that particular track while you were recording, and you switched over to the fader view while you're recording, the compressor effect would drop off, temporarily anyway. So I guess the firmware update fixes that small drop or that brief drop off that you would have with your compressor settings if you go between fader and track view during your recording session. For me, I'm usually either in track view or fader view, and I can't really remember me toggling back and forth while I'm recording something. But I guess that was a bug that was present that Zoom fixed. The other minor bug that was kind of in there is that, and I don't even know why people would be doing this, but oddly, if you back out and you're in the project menu and you go into the naming options for your project and you wanted to name your project something else and you hit the record button while you're in this screen, it would freeze up the R20 and you'd have to power off and power back on. But I guess, I don't know why anybody would hit record, maybe on accident, I guess. But if you hit record, I guess it would freeze up the R20 in this instance, and the firmware update to 2.4 fixed that. Outside of that, it really just says that there are only minor bug fixes. I really haven't run into any major bugs while I've been recording with this thing for, I don't know, 7-8 months now. The only bug that I come across occasionally is, oddly enough, I will be recording on a track, or I'll be playing back a track actually, is when it's more common, is I'll be playing back a track, say it's on track 5, and I'm adjusting the fader control. I'll have my fader control up near 0, and I want to just kind of tweak it, and I notice nothing's happening. I'm not really moving the volume levels for track 5. In order to fix that, I just drop the fader all the way down and bring it back up, and that seems to sort of unstick the fader wherever it was, why it wasn't moving and it wasn't altering and adjusting my volume levels as I was sliding it up and down. So that's the only bug that I've encountered once in a while, and it seems like other people have had some sort of similar bug encounter like that with the fader controls, where they're not able to control their volume, at least temporarily, based on the comments that people had left in some of my other videos. But that's really how I fix it. I just bring it down, bring it back up, and the bug is sort of gone and the fader control works again. So if you encounter that, that's one way to kind of fix that minor bug. I don't know if this firmware update also fixed that or not. I haven't encountered that in the last day. It's kind of rare, but it has happened to me probably 3-4 times while I've been using the R20. So you have all of that in place. Zoom is making the updates to the firmware, which I think is fantastic. But there's a couple things that are just blatantly missing. And I've made a video on this before. To me, I think that the biggest thing that's missing is the Bluetooth app control. So there's supposed to be an iOS app that would allow you to control your R20 remotely using the Bluetooth adapter, the BTA1 adapter that pops into the side of the R20, and it gives it some Bluetooth capability, which will allow the R20 to interact with the iOS app, which I think is a pretty cool feature. And Zoom was advertising it heavily on their web pages for the R20 as part of its promotional content. And that was back when I bought this thing, in December of 2021, January of 2022, right around that time that I ordered it. There was plenty of advertisement. I thought, hey, this is going to be a great thing for the future for me, even though it said it wasn't available right away. On the website, it said it was going to be available in spring of 2022. And then spring came and went, and still no app update. On the web pages now for the R20 on Zoom's web pages, it says that it's going to have the app control, and it'll say that it'll have voice control for the visually impaired, which again, I think is fantastic. But now it just vaguely says 2022. And whenever you see something like that, it's going to be toward the end of the year. So sadly, I was expecting the Bluetooth app to be available at some point in time earlier in 2022. My best guess now is probably November, December of 2022 before we see the iOS app for that. I'd love to see it sooner and be pleasantly surprised, but right now that's kind of my mindset of when we might see the R20 Bluetooth app. So that's what I feel like is most, the glaring omission in terms of new features. There's other things that I hope that Zoom will update on this when it comes to maybe like synth settings and giving us more synth engines and voices that we could use besides the 18 different synth sounds that we have. I think that would be fantastic. There's also some minor stuff here about like the click track that I'd love to see updated, where maybe we could use it for sync control for different types of synths like pocket operators. That would be an awesome addition and update. But while those things are missing, and I'd love to see Zoom continue to work on them, the one thing that at least is encouraging is that for a multi-track product from a relatively small company, they're not like Microsoft or Apple, but Zoom is a sizable company, but on the grand scale of things, kind of small. I do like that they've released 2 substantial firmware updates in the past year. So it's really only been about 8 good months, maybe 9 months that this thing has sort of been on the market. We've already seen 2 firmware updates. I look at that as actually a positive, and it's encouraging. They are fixing bugs that are popping up. Some of them are bugs that I never encountered, but at least it shows that Zoom is conducting their own tests. They're probably listening to feedback from users, and they are fixing things as they go along, which, again, for kind of a budget multi-tracker, when I purchased it, it was $399 US. The normal price now is $449 US, but I see it on sale, and there's $30 rebates, I think, even on Zoom's website right now. So you kind of see it creeping closer to the $400 mark, catch it on sale, something like that. That's kind of a budget multi-tracker, and for Zoom to be updating this thing on a regular basis, I think is awesome. So I'm hopeful that Zoom will continue to provide updates. If they're doing things like every 3-4 months, I think that that's a great schedule for Zoom R20 owners, that we can look forward to new updates, making sure that bugs are squashed, and maybe, hopefully, new features are added to the R20 over time. So I just wanted to provide that quick overview on the firmware update and what's involved. Again, just kind of bug fixes. But if you haven't updated your firmware, go check out my other video and be sure to do so, because you don't want to lose any of your audio tracks with that version 1.0 firmware that comes installed on this thing when it ships. Beyond that, thanks for watching, and hope to see you again next time. Goodbye.